It was founded even at Bethlehem Community Church, was the original location, by a man called Rodney Lake, also an R and an L for the initials, whereas I'm the Rowan Locke. He used to sign off things RL all the time, and I was like, are you talking to me or are you talking from me? Anyway, it was slightly confusing, but I've been in charge of the organisation for the last 4 years, and so we work in the field of Christian apologetics. And apologetics just simply means giving a reason for the faith that we have. And we specifically focus on the areas that you might say are either outside of what we can find in Scripture or affirm what we find in Scripture. So that is things like the scientific evidence for the Christian worldview, or just even the scientific evidence for a creator God. It's the philosophical evidence when we think deeply about why is there something rather than nothing? Where did everything come from? Why do we have morality? Why do we have things that we can think of above and beyond and outside of ourselves? Metaphysical sort of things, as they like to call them. How can we understand anything? So we do science, philosophy, archaeology, the tradition of Christianity and how it has tended to lead to nations that are slightly more prosperous. If you notice, there's often these international world indexing sort of things. It's like a list of, the top 10 least corrupt countries or the top 10 happiest countries. And now there's a strong correlation between those top nations and income and quality of life and health. And they all happen to, there's something in common about the Denmark flag and the Norway flag, is they've all got these crosses on them. I don't think it's a coincidence that, in spite of the fact that today they maybe have a lot more people with atheist leadings, but they're historically founded on Christian values, and that's reflected on their flags. I can even hold this. I know you said it's difficult to get back in again, but we will endure. So thank you so much for having me along today, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about the philosophy of science, because science, as Peter said, is a very useful tool. It's very useful for helping us understand many of the things of the world. But science has been strongly associated in recent times with atheism. And we want to unravel that little connection that we find there to show how actually science is very complementary to the Christian worldview most of all. I watch a lot of Neil deGrasse Tyson videos online. He's a science communicator. He's an astrophysicist. I've spoken with other astrophysicists and said he's a really good talker, but a bit of a B-grade astrophysicist, but that's okay. He's great at what he is communicating. And he said, as they are currently practiced, there is no common ground between science and religion. Although just as in hostage negotiations, it's probably best to keep both sides talking to each other. So here he is highlighting this delineation between science and religions of all types. And rather strategically, atheism is promoted by many science influencers. This is a strategic placement, you might say, that a lot of the biggest science communicators around the world, they've got Stephen Hawking, Steven Pinker, Richard Dawkins, Feynman's not one anymore, but he was an atheist for a long time. There's, who's the other one, the English one? Brian Cox, again, although he is a lot more agnostic rather than atheist. But it's no coincidence that atheism has adopted science as its philosophy of base. And so there's a lot of dual promotion of science and atheism at the same time. I will skip a few slides because I know we've got a limited amount of time. And so it begs the question, so why might the scientists that live today lead more and more towards atheism? What is underpinning their worldview that would lead a scientist to lean towards atheism? The thing to remember is that the reasons to reject belief in God are not new. They date back basically as long as anything. And Thomas Aquinas in 1274 communicated that there are two big reasons that he thinks people will deny the existence of God. And let's just say any God at this stage. We don't have to hone in on the God of Christianity, but just a God, a creator. And one is the problem of evil and suffering, because the traits that we associate with God is that he is all-powerful, all good, benevolent, and yet we still see evil and all-knowing, and yet we still see pain and evil and suffering. So why would this all-good, all-powerful being allow those things to happen? And we're not going to talk about that, but that's the one other talk I do. But then the other reason people might not believe in God is they call it the sufficiency of natural causes. That is, we don't need God to explain how anything happens. There's enough natural explanation for the way things are. And so we're going to focus on that second part here. And so the four common atheist arguments from science is that the universe, it has no gaps in it that need God. It's too ancient, it's very, very old, and therefore it's not created. It's too big for us to be important. Like, that's just pretty arrogant to think we're that special. And it's also that the universe is not special in any way that points to God. And so I'm going to address some of these, and then I'm going to give also a little bit more about explaining what in these things actually points to God. Now, the first claim is that the universe has no gaps that need God. And that's we have discovered lots of natural processes. The development of human beings is a natural process that reproduces over and over again. We understand with reasonable, especially in Papamoa, I grew up in Wellington, you could never tell what the weather was growing up. But in Tauranga, we reasonably know what the weather's going to be like. I'm getting too close to there. There we go. I'll point this away from there. We understand things such as the water cycles, like why does it rain, why is it hot, why is it sunny. We even understand galaxy formations, why galaxies have formed, how star clusters form, all sorts. The plant cycle, photosynthesis, chlorophyll, all of the things, not to be confused with chloroform, all of the things that we see in nature. And so there's a lot here that looks a lot like a very finely tuned watch. Now, a watch has lots of many little components in, and its final point is to tell the time. But everything looks to be operating basically without intervention, or without the need, or without any cause. There's also the claim that the universe is too old. So all that to say that we do understand a lot about the universe, and science has explained a lot of things in it. Now, also that the universe is too old. Now, if we read the account, our Bible or Genesis, it seems like the Earth's only been around, according to that literature, for about 7,000 years. Although that's one interpretation. But the universe seems too old. We've got ancient humans, we've got geology, we've seen that processes in nature have used water over tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of years to carve rivers. We've got biology and genetics. We understand the genetic history of humans and animals. We've got the speed of light. Now, we know what the speed of light is, that it's about 300,000 kilometers per second, slightly less than that. And so if light is that fast, and it travels that much in 1 year, in a light year, then the universe is just simply too big. It's been around too long for us to be able to make sense. It just doesn't align with what you might see in the Bible from an interpretation of the Bible. And my other one is craters. So if you look at the moon, you'll notice that there are a lot of craters on there. Now, we have not observed one of those craters getting made. Maybe we've seen maybe once, and there was a big thing where a meteor hit the moon and you could see it on camera. So maybe we've seen one. But if you track that frequency of moon bombardation, as they like to call it, good word, you'll notice that there's tons and millions of these overlapping craters. And it leads to the question, it's just like, when did all of these form? And if we track the lineage of what we've observed, then that moon has been there for a very long time, about as old as what most scientists say is there. And even Christians who might believe that the universe is only 7,000 years old will acknowledge that it appears old. Even if they don't believe that it is old, they'll acknowledge that it does appear old. And the next claim is, the universe is huge and we are a small speck. I mean, you can do a little bit of a scale out. The scale of the universe is truly marvelous. I mean, we know how small Earth is in our solar system. I can't remember which city it is, but they do along their waterfront a scale of the universe. And it starts with a massive sun in the middle of the waterfront, and then you go about 1 kilometer and you get to Mercury, and then you go another kilometer and you get to Venus, and then you go another couple kilometers and you get to Earth, and Earth is only this big and the sun is, and you're like, hang on, this is a very, very long distance away. And that's just our solar system. When asked how close people are with models of, say, the moon and the Earth, if you pretend this is the moon and say the Earth is over here, you're like, oh, how far apart are these? And most people would put them about there. It's like, no, if the moon is this big, then the Earth is over by that wall. That's a phenomenal distance. I mean, anybody who's had to fly to England and back understands how big just the Earth is. And yet you can fit the width of every single planet in our solar system between us and the moon if you were to do that. But of course, it would be very uncomfortable for us. And so that's just our solar system, and yet we are one solar system amongst 200 to 400 billion star systems in our galaxy alone. And then you take our galaxy, for instance, and what's really interesting is we didn't know that galaxies even existed more than 100 years ago. We just thought that was it. And then they realized they were looking at this one part of our galaxy going like, that's a very large cluster of stars in that one part of our galaxy. How does that work? And then they were like, hang on, what if that's a different galaxy and it's actually a really, really, really long way away? And that's when they discovered Andromeda. Andromeda is our nearest and largest galaxy that close to us. It's also on a collision course with us, but don't panic. It's a couple billion years away from having a collision with that one. So, you know, I don't think even my children need to worry about that. But it's so big in our night sky, and it's so relatively close that actually, if you could see it quite clearly, it'd be if you put your hand about this big at about an arm's length, that's how big the next galaxy is to us in our sky. So it is a very large galaxy, but it's not in our galaxy. And so this is the first time we realized we're actually observing a whole thing that we're in outside of us, which is very, very interesting. And when the Hubble Space Telescope turned its lens into what it thought was an empty part of space, they said, oh, let's put our lens of this Hubble telescope and we'll point it into what we think is a void. They didn't think there was anything there, and we'll just leave it fixed on that one. They found a star nearby that they could fix it on, so they could, you know, so it didn't drift or anything like that. Let's just leave it there. And of course, just like our cameras, you've got a when you take a picture, there's a length of time, and the more time you leave it open, the lens open, the more light enters in, and so even very fine particles of light that you wouldn't get in a quick picture. So they left it open for a couple of days. And then when they looked at the picture, they discovered, oh my gosh, in this empty bit of space, we can see hundreds of billions of individual galaxies. This universe is so much bigger than we thought it was. And now that's why shortly after that, they realized the Hubble Space Telescope is insufficient for us to be able to gather the data we need to know about the origins of our galaxy, and that's when they launched the James Webb Space Telescope. You know, a couple $1 billion later, I'm glad it's not my money. I don't think it is, at least. And so then the final thing is they took what they call a snapshot of the observable universe, the cosmic microwave background radiation picture. I'll talk about that a little bit more later. And it's basically the radiation that was given off and left behind after the Big Bang. Shortly after the Big Bang, a type of radiation was emitted, and we can take a snapshot of that, and it shows the absolute billions of clusters and galaxies that form what's known as the observable universe. Truly, we do not know how big the universe is. Any scientists that say, well, it's probably, 28 billion light years across or something like that, what they're really doing is they're saying like, well, the furthest thing we can see away is about 14 billion light years. And so if it's 14 billion light years in every direction, then it's about 28 billion light years apart. But this is simply our observable universe. We don't know what is beyond the horizon of what we can see. And so it might be infinitely large, or just certainly far larger than what we can observe. So the universe is certainly true. It's certainly very huge, and then that makes for like, well, who am I? In the scale of all of this, and even I am one of 8 billion, 8.2 billion on Earth now, and one of maybe 100 billion, 120 billion in human history that we know about. So who am I? Isn't it a bit egocentric to think that we've got any importance or significance in such a large universe? So these questions draw us to, well, what should our response be? Because look at all of these. Science, these reasons here about why the atheist arguments from science is like, we look at these and go like, then what conclusion can we draw? There's no place for God. Who's heard of the saying, God of the gaps? I see a couple of hands there. So the God of the gaps is basically this argument that an atheist scientist might make. We used to not understand how the world works. So we would say the gods did it, or God did it, whether it be Thor with thunder, or whether it be, earth gods with earthquakes and things like that. So we started with that. As we grew in our understanding, we needed these gods to explain natural phenomena less and less and less. And so you're like, oh, well, the trend of our understanding of the world is going up. And so what it is basically we're squeezing God out of all of those unknowns and moving to a place to say like, well, science hasn't explained it yet for anything we don't understand. And so though, with our current tracking of development, we will get to a place where science explains all of these things. And so that is the God of the gaps argument, just simply inserting God every time we don't understand it. And however, that can also be flipped on its head a little bit, because not only you're not just arguing for a God of the gaps, but you're actually then arguing in favor of science of the gaps. That science hasn't explained it yet, but science will. Now, that also takes a level of faith, especially on the more complex matters that science doesn't actually purport or even want to explain. It's not designed to explain. And those are questions around philosophy, things around metaphysics. It's there to explain the natural things that we can observe, but it's not there to explain the things we cannot. And that's why you start hearing a little bit of theories that are slightly unprovable. There's no evidence for it. They may be a good theory, but they're also very difficult or possibly impossible to prove. There's been a lot of time spent on string theory. Again, they're kind of getting to the place of string theory, which is this theory that at the fundamental particle level, there are vibrating strings that dictate what a particle will be, and they make up atoms, and the atoms cluster together and make up chemistry and all those sorts of things, and you get up. So it's like, okay, we understand that atoms are very small, but you break those apart and you get these subatomic particles, neutrons, protons, and electrons. Break those apart further and then you get these quarks, and I don't think they did a good job of naming all of those. Somebody was very bored. And other subatomical gluons and other subatomical particles. Okay, what if you break those down? What are those things? And string theory says, oh, they're these vibrating strings that the rhythm of the universe talks about. Again, it's just very hard to prove. It's very hard to see any smaller than that. The other theory about why the universe might exist is, we're just one universe of an infinite amount of universes that exist either simultaneously or in linear of each other, in parallel of each other, called the multiverse theory. Again, we don't have a lot of evidence that this theory actually exists, that there is such thing as multiverses. It might be a nice idea to explain the fine-tuning of this universe, which I'll get into, but as it stands, there's no evidence for more than one universe except for the universe that we're in. But science has been extremely successful, so I think we can give science its due, whether it be the possible billions of lives that have been saved through vaccines, whether it be our ability to get off this planet and go into space, think about MRI machines, think about our understanding of DNA, and particularly in finding disease-prone DNA strands, our understanding of black holes. We went from this theory of a black hole to this actually being able to observe one, although that's not actually a picture of a black hole, that is from Interstellar, the movie. And just our general ability to observe and understand the functioning of the universe. We can calculate with quite some precision even the journey of satellites and spacecraft past planets. I think that's absolutely phenomenal, and so science has been really, really successful. It has brought around the modern world, the fact that we can live in such comfort in such a otherwise inhospitable planet, and most of us do pretty well at surviving basically as long as we can. I think that's, give science credit where credit is due. But science is also limited, and science was never purported to be an explanation of all things. And that's where you see that science is supposed to explain every single phenomena, then suddenly you've left the realm of true science and you've moved into this place called scientism. Anything with a bit of an ism on the end of it, denotes that it's a bit extreme. And actually one of the books we've got here is called Scientism and Secularism, and it explains this at a much deeper philosophical level. It's extremely limited, and it does not seem to include an explanation of what is right and wrong, or what we call objective morality, our subjective experiences of the world, that usually has a D on it, that world, why our universe exists and not another universe, and that's touching on that multiverse theory, and an explanation of the success of science. We might say this is even the intelligibility argument, that we can actually understand anything about this world with quite a lot of precision, and whether the universe has a purpose or not. None of these are a gap within science. Science as a field is complete, but doesn't try or attempt or want to make the attempts to answer these other questions, because these are non-science questions. And there is a long history of this discussion, like I said, and engaging with skeptics, your argument should be tailored to the era of those, man, there's a lot of typos in this, those who you are talking to. If they say there is no God, then they can be brought to acknowledge God exists by considering the skillful and wise economy of the universe. That is, the thing about the universe is that it is very skillfully designed, just by observation. Now, they might make the argument that there is the appearance of design, but I would go further. It's just like every time we see something like a chair or a wall or anything like that, we presume a designer is behind it. So, but apparently, once you step into nature, then there is no designer behind it. Now, I find that a bit too big to jump. So either there's something about the efficiency of design that lends itself towards that, but there's no good reason for many things to be designed as beautifully as they are. So that's sort of like an argument in favor of the existence of God as the apparent design of the universe. And science finds mechanisms within a greater order. Now, so again, science is about understanding the processes, the mechanisms. It's not about explaining necessarily the origins, But it's about understanding that there is a process. It doesn't try to, again, this is the intelligibility of the universe. That is, why can we understand anything? Why does it all make sense to us? How can we know anything about it that we're able to navigate this universe or this world with such precision? I'll get into my car that was developed by science and I'll reliably drive the speed limit, obviously, back to Papamoa, and it'll reliably get me there. Apparently it'd be safer if I was going in a plane, but not if I was flying because I'm not a pilot. But there is so much certainty that we have about the universe that we interact with. And if we never actually question, like, wait, how is this little, as they call it, your 3 pounds of grey matter in this head, able to comprehend everything around us to such clarity and precision? It's just this underlying thing we take for granted. And God often uses processes to achieve his purposes. And he can even use processes that appear random to us, and yet we find out that it's actually done with great precision. And Proverbs 16:33 talks that we may throw the dice, but the Lord determines how they fall. And for instance, processes that Jesus talks about in Matthew 6:26 is, look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are they not much more valuable than they? And you think, well, is God taking his hand out of space and time and inserting it in and sprinkling grain for the birds to eat? No, Jesus and everybody in their world understood that the birds are out there finding food, and yet at a philosophical level we understand that God is the one that's feeding them. It's even for all of human history, we've nearly basically understood where babies come from. I think you guys know where babies come from by this stage. But we know that process of human and reproduction, and yet every time a Christian might be asked, like, well, where'd you come from? It's just like, well, God made me. It's just like, well, my parents made a decision. and yet we understand that God made me. These things have never been a contradiction in our worldview. God uses processes to bring about his will. Even the greatest miracle of the Old Testament, the freeing of the slaves, then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and all that night the Lord drove the sea back with a strong east wind. Now, our perception is, if you've watched, like me, that cartoon, Prince of Egypt, that Moses goes up with his staff, puts it in there, and splits the sea. But that's a bit of poetic license, because we know in scripture it says, no, a strong eastern wind turned the water that was there into dry land. And it blew all night. It was not in an instant. There was a weather phenomena that happened over the night. And it's not trying, though it is a miracle, it is not trying to say that it was, I would say, supernatural looking. It was using natural causes to bring about this miracle. So the order of nature that allows scientific explanations, in fact, is a pointer to God. The fact that things are ordered, the fact that we can calculate with precision the movement of planets around the sun, the movement of the sun around the galaxy, the formation of the galaxy, and that these things can be calculated with mathematics to such high precision, and that we have these things that we call laws of nature. Because God is king over the whole cosmos and has made laws for his realm. And this is what I say, there is an intelligibility of the universe. And his laws are laws whether we agree with them or not, much like the law of gravity or the constant. And so there are a lot of things that science can explain. There are also some scientific phenomena that are very, very difficult to explain by natural processes alone. Now, my good old friend Richard Dawkins, who's coming to New Zealand in November, he's an evolutionary biologist, and he's obviously an avowed atheist, although he has recently described himself as a cultural Christian, because he'd rather be a cultural Christian than, say, a cultural Muslim. He likes churches, he doesn't like mosques, he likes, carols, Christmas songs, he likes hymns. He thinks that those things are good and better. And he said he gave faith this definition. It's an incorrect definition, but this is how the atheistic world might put the Christian worldview. Faith is belief in spite of, or even perhaps because of, the lack of evidence. Now, as Christians, we don't believe that is the definition of the word faith. It's not belief in something in spite of evidence or because of a lack of evidence. It's actually, faith is a synonym for the word trust. Now, it's more parallel or akin to the faith that we might have in a spouse. There is a trust there that has been built over time, and that trust leads us to continue our commitment with them into the future. And so, though there is lots that may be in the Bible that we don't understand, and maybe while we're living on this earth it might even be as impossible for us to understand, because the God that we're talking about by definition, though we can understand him, we cannot exhaust our understanding of him. So it's impossible for us to achieve all of the answers. But is there enough that has been written in the Bible? Is there enough from our lived experience? Is there enough from the scientific evidence to give us trust that we're off to a good start? And that by choosing to commit to God and receiving Jesus into our hearts, that he will continue to reveal all of those extra things to us. And so if you've got 99 pieces of evidence that say, oh, well, this God is real and true, and you maybe got 10 bits that are doubts, not necessarily contradictions, but are doubts that lead you to doubt that. It's just like, well, then we're not weighing the evidence rationally. We need to take everything, like we wouldn't give up on science just because a scientific theory proved not to be correct. Like people aren't giving up on science just because string theory has proved itself more difficult to prove. It'd be like, okay, we don't quite understand it, we need to go back to the drawing board and we'll try again to see whether or not we can figure it out. So that's the difference that I see between faith and between the faith that Dawkins might purport and what we understand biblical faith to mean. And there are miracles that every scientist sort of has to believe in. That is, everything came from nothing. That is the question of, why is there something rather than nothing? Why did the universe go through the bothering of existence? And nothing scientifically is very different than nothing of our intuitive understanding. Like if I was to take that cup there and, we've drank all the tea out of it, you say like, what's in this cup? Or nothing. And it's just like, well, actually there's something in there. It's like, well, there's the gas from the air. Okay, let's suck all of the gas out of that. And you're just like, now is there nothing in the cup? It's just like, well, there's no particles, if you could get a perfect vacuum, which is very hard to achieve. There's no particles, but there is something there. There is space. There are forces that are going through it. There's electromagnetic spectrum. There's actually a medium for things to pass through. So even though there's nothing, it's still something. Now that's very different than the nothing that we explained of like what's maybe outside of our universe, if that's even possible to think about, or what existed before the universe. That's a very different nothing. That is no space, nothing, no medium to travel through, absolutely nothing. Also, another miracle that scientists have to understand is that order comes from chaos. Now, how do you do science? What is the facility in your body that's used to do science? Well, it's your mind. Hang on, is it your mind or is it your brain? Is there a distinction? I don't know. I'd like to get other people's thoughts on that. For me, I think what our mind and our thinking is quite distinct from our brain. It takes place in our brain, except our thoughts that are held up here, that can be shared with others and then it goes to them. I think that's very interesting. And so if our brain is simply the process of unguided processes, then how can we trust it to understand anything in the world? How do we not know we're just absolutely completely mad, Or as I like to think about when I was younger, I was like, how do I know the green that I'm seeing on the lawn is the same color as the green that's in everybody else's mind? Maybe it's, to me, it would be perceived through their eyes as red. No, there is reliable order that we are all collectively understanding, and with a lot of precision. Even the communication that we're using, we've managed to come up with a fine code, and we can even fill out books and books with the knowledge that we have, and then we share it with other people and they understand it. Then there is how life came from non-life. Again, this is not a question that science has even gotten quite close yet to even understanding, is how life, the first most basic celled organism, came from nothing. Now, it sounded easy initially because we didn't understand anything about the cell. So if you take, for instance, Charles Darwin, he looked at a cell and was like, well, it's just like a grey blob, it's the basic building blocks, sort of thing like that. However, then we got microscopes and discovered that the cell is a complex machine. It is ridiculously, so even the necessity to get to that very complicated level, to jump from a rock or non-organic matter to organic matter, and then organic matter that has the ability to replicate itself. Because remember, it doesn't have to just form once, it has to duplicate itself right away and over and over and over again, and survive. And so initially they thought like, oh, as soon as you got the right elements, a streak of lightning in the primordial soup, you're gonna have life. It's that easy. And yet, for all of scientists' pursuit, they can replicate quite well, but they cannot build themselves the building blocks of life. That's a very difficult thing to do. It's the field of abiogenesis. And so it's just a very, very difficult feature to accomplish. Now, to take a little bit, even if scientists could figure out this process, what do you think that would prove? It would prove that the smartest minds in this world were necessary to create life from non-life. And again, it kind of sounds like you're pointing back to an intelligent designer. So one way or another, it's slightly problematic for the scientific field to try and replicate something, saying it's blind natural causes, when it really looks like there is evidence to say that that an intelligence has gotten that going. And then don't get me started on the complexity of DNA. Actually, you will get me started after this. But and then, of course, like I was talking before, there's getting the immaterial for the material. That is, how do we have a conscience from something that didn't have a conscience? And also, where does our morality come from? Particularly amongst this, we've probably got a lot of this crowd. We've probably got a lot of shared moral values. We all recognize that some things are always wrong, no matter where you are. And so science is not trying to make an understanding of that. Or I should say, it ought not to, because it's outside of its field. How am I going for time? Oh my gosh, what's going on? So, the universe had a beginning. Now, a lot of people didn't think our universe had a beginning, to go back to this question. Most people didn't. Only the Christians seem to think that the universe had a beginning. In fact, when the Big Bang Theory was proposed, everyone dismissed it because they thought like, no, the universe has been eternal. Because annoyingly, if the universe had a beginning, it sounds a little bit too much like the beginning of Genesis, and they were trying to avoid that. But when the evidence was just too compelling to say, oh, there was a beginning, there was a Big Bang, the people they had the solid state theory just lamented and said like, oh, we have to spin this on its head to make it look like it was nothing to do with Christianity the whole time. And no, it was a priest that proposed the theory in the first place. So I'll skip that one. I'll skip straight to DNA. So DNA, that's where we have that conversation about life from non-life. Now, DNA is not a chain reaction set of elements. DNA is a very specific and very complex coding sequence. Human DNA is microscopically thin. Obviously, it's very, very, very thin. You can't see it, obviously. However, if you were to take any single cell in your body and get the DNA out of it and unravel it, despite the fact it's so thin and small you can't see it, even when you unravel it, it would be 2 meters, 190, 2 meters long. So it is incredibly sophisticated. Now, if the DNA was the thickness of your thumb like this for scale, then this will go all the way to London. Whenever we see coding, we presume there is a coder, so computer programs. I mean, nobody thinks that this TV and these programs and everything like that came about by purely natural, unguided causes. We presume, a human at the computer company at Apple made the software for this. We don't presume that that came about by any other means except for a person. So why, when we would look at the coding that's in our DNA, would we presume that that came about without writing from basically an intelligent designer? Now, the smallest functional self-replicating strands of DNA contain roughly 473 genes. So, in that snapshot, primordial soup, lightning hitting the swamp that caused the first life to come from non-life, or whatever theory is, it had a DNA strand had to arrange itself into 473 genes. Now, that's just to get it started. Oh, and in a way that it can replicate itself. Because maybe, I think you only need 130 genes to get something that's living, but it's living until it dies, and then, oh good, no life, no human history, no nothing. So that's that on DNA. Then we've got the fine-tuning of the universe. Again, something else we take for granted. There are these things called cosmological constants, the strong nuclear force, the weak nuclear force. If these settings were any different, then nothing would exist. The universe would be too heavy that it wouldn't expand and be able to create. It would all just collapse in on itself. The Big Bang would go bang and no. It would just be a solid no. The atoms would be too heavy. If the electrons flying around nucleuses were too close, that would be a problem. That's the strong nuclear force. The nuclear force is precisely calibrated to allow for the creation of heavy elements during supernova explosions. That is because when the universe was created, it was mostly hydrogen and helium to start with, but we have got heavy elements like gold and titanium, things like that. All of those elements in our Earth that we take for granted were formed in the explosions of stars millions of billions of years prior to us. And so, again, humans couldn't have existed without all of these processes having happened prior to our birth, or the birth of humanity. Then finally, you get to the Fermi paradox, and I know I'm tight for time, so I'll just finish abruptly on this one here. Now, that's the contradiction between the high mathematical probability. Look, Earth, as soon as Earth was cool enough, life formed on this Earth. Now, if you were to take the fact that every single star we see out there probably has a couple of Earth-like planets around it, then that means that the universe should be teeming with life everywhere you look. And yet when we look out, there is just nothing. There is nothing to suggest any extraterrestrial life, let alone intelligent extraterrestrial life, or even a trace that there has been extraterrestrial life, maybe in the earlier cycles of stars and galaxies and solar systems. There's just no evidence for there to be anything. So in spite of the fact that apparently life just magically forms very quickly after a planet cools to the right temperature, and it's approximately the right temperature, it just doesn't seem to be that there is any sign of life out there, let alone intellectual life. And I mean, it does leave us with like 5 minutes. But so the final one is on consciousness. It is the subjective experience of awareness. Again, there's no scientific process that's trying to guide from, say, we went from plant life to animal life, if you follow the chain of evolution. Again, a lot of what I've said here does not contradict the theory of evolution, it sort of complements it. So how did we get to this level of understanding? Again, AI has caused many to question this unique trait. Who's used ChatGPT? Yeah. Oh yes, yeah, cool. We'll be checking your homework later for cheating. IA has caused many to question this unique trait. But while AI can be known and understood, it appears not to be a replication of what's going on in our consciousness. And then again, just like if we were able to make life, if AI was an authentic replication of the consciousness of human beings, and I'd argue it can't, because though it can replicate the idea of feeling, we truly feel, though it can replicate the poetry around love, we actually can love, and I don't think AI is going to be capable of doing that. But even if it could, all it would point to is very smart, intelligent designers that have been coding it, again pointing back to a firm worldview of God. Cool, thank you so much for being good listeners. I'll leave that there for now, but I'm happy to take questions, and thank you again for having me along. I hope I didn't lose you too much.
Yeah, feel free to ask questions.
And I'm a GP of apologetics, not a specialist. So it just means I can point you in the right direction, but I don't know everything, believe it or not. My wife does though.
Well, I think Sharon has given us a lot of food for thought, and probably the questions will arise with time, and I was hoping Henry would ask something.
I was hoping so too.
Excellent.
Personally, I don't understand why the Fermi paradox is a paradox at all. I mean, we've been on this planet, humans, maybe 1 million years. But it's only in the last 20, 30 years that we've been even aware of the existence of other planets, right?
Yeah.
And if our civilization lasts 100,000 years, it might be a paradox. I don't see there's a paradox. It's highly likely that we will destroy ourselves.
The great filter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't see that's a real paradox.
Yeah. Fermi thought it was, but yeah,
I know.
Yeah, it's a good point, and so that is the Fermi paradox. So as you say, it's like, well, shouldn't we be able to observe something if there should be advanced civilizations, and one of the counter sort of points is that there's something called the Great Filter. That is not just us, but every possible civilization out there gets to a certain point where they can't progress beyond that, and they tend to destroy themselves, say before they can go multiplanetary or be able to have some sort of influence. I suppose, and I mean it's a good point, because the Fermi paradox is certainly not a convincing, all-round convincing thing, but to think about, we have been observing radio frequencies from all directions, and there seems to be no signals, at least ones that we can understand. We've yet to discover any traces of things that might lend itself to say that there's an advanced civilization. So it could be that everyone's caught in the Great Filter, that is, all of the life on other planets gets to a similar point to us, and then they destroy themselves before they can go multiplanetary, which is probably what Elon Musk is thinking. Trying to get interplanetary before we destroy ourselves, especially if nuclear discovery predates, certainly interplanetary, but intergalactic travel. So, that's a good point. It's a paradox for some people saying, and that's why there's a lot of sort of like, oh, this comet's passing by and it's in a weird shape. Then maybe that's a missile from another civilization, or and why they're looking so intently for life on other planets. There's a lot of investment in that area, and yet it's still coming up short. So yeah.
It's only been such a short time.
Yeah, on our time frame, but it's been such a long time for possible previous civilizations. So with our current observable abilities, our observation abilities, any advanced civilization that predates us, even if they've been extinct, then there should be possible traces like Dyson's spheres.
Yes, but on the other hand, it's only recently we've even been aware of other planets going around other stars.
Yeah.
I think
we're at the very beginning of this.
I think we take your point on the Fermi. It's not a proof. Yeah, no, that's very good to have opportunity to answer. And thank you very much for the tremendous effort in producing this presentation. And I think it does open up the question that there are gaps in what science can explain. and there are gaps philosophically as well as scientifically. And so that gives us a lot of food for thought. And Rowan mentioned, well, we're all a similar culture, we all believe in the same moral values and codes. Why is that? And that's what's going to be explained next week when I get a turn. And it's about worldview and how it developed over the centuries and why we think so differently to the people of antiquity who had a totally different moral code to us. And it's a fascinating story, and it's a hidden story in many ways. And I think you'll find it very interesting who, why, and what we believe is actually a very common factor that's all related to today's topic of who the designer became to involve us in improving humanity and healing a very sick society where it was standing for antiquity and particularly around 2,000 years ago. So we'd love to see you for that, and I think you will find it interesting. So thank you so much. Thank you again, Rowan, and have a great day.